You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to On the Way Home. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly, and today we are joined by Philip Mills, Chief Executive Officer of Habitat for Humanity Waterloo Region. Phil brings a mix of leadership experience across community development, healthcare, and housing, and he's known for embracing disruption and change as tools for progress. From being described as a blend of Bart Simpson and St. Francis of Assisi to leading bold initiatives like Build Now Waterloo Region, Phil brings both compassion and vision to tackling Canada's housing crisis. We'll dive into his journey, the impact of Habitat programs, and the lessons he's carrying forward in shaping housing solutions. Let's jump in. Welcome, Philip, to On the Way Home.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you on as well. We always start with our signature question: what does home mean to you?
Such a good question. That kind of thing seems like some of these things should be simple, and then you start to think about it, you're like, it's a big question. I think for me, it's that idea about like being safe and known. Like, where can you be safe and known? Where do you feel like you are like understood, that you can kind of be that best version of yourself? Like, home comes with a real connotation of rest to me. Like, where is the location where you can feel like you are at rest, where you don't have to perform or be? And so I think for me, like, home is some sort of mixture of like family and knowing and rest.
That's very cool. I'm not sure that I've heard the known thing, but that makes a lot of sense, where you actually, like, you're recognized, right? These are, the people that you live with are witnesses to your life. That's a really special piece of humanity. Very cool.
Yeah, well, I kind of always talk about, like, I will half jokingly be like, it's nice to be understood. Like, it's nice to be able to just be who I am, and in a space where I can be, and I don't have to pretend or put on or have a mask. I get to be, and my kids understand me, my wife understands me. So that's a huge part of what being at home means to me.
Yeah, that's a gift. I'm going to stick with calling you Philip, since Mom said to. You've had executive leadership experience across community development, healthcare, and housing. Can you share with us a bit how those diverse perspectives have shaped the way you approach solutions to housing affordability today?
I think, like, all of that experience just makes it so clear that, like, people need to be at the center of what we're doing. Like, it's really easy to get drifted to interesting ideas or new or fancy, but like at the end, all of that has to be really centered on, is this good for people? Like, when we were doing community development work, if you weren't, really focused on that, you could have a cool program and be like, did anybody want this? Like, is this good for the people here? Like, it's a neat idea, but did people, like, healthcare is kind of notorious for that, where there's lots of opportunities to try and, fix and make things better. And in the end, forget that there's a person on the other side as we think about, efficiencies and dollars. And the same thing with housing. Like, there's so much housing that is done and so much work that we're trying to do to try and fix a problem, where sometimes it can be really easy to forget, like, there is a person who's supposed to be living here. There is a person who doesn't have or isn't accessing housing the way we want. And so, like, the through line from all of that is, like, people are so important, and how easy it is to forget people sometimes.
You've been described as someone who thrives on disruption and change. Can you share with the listeners, how do you feel that mindset influences your work in housing policy and program development?
Sure. Like, I guess I think it fits, but, like, of course I think it fits because that's the way that I'm kind of wired and the way that people think about me. There's this idea that, a mentor and a colleague I've known for years, talked about. He said this, the system is designed to get the results that we're getting. Like, stuff doesn't happen by accident. Like, this is a function of design. And, like, the system is getting results today that suck. Like, this is not good enough. We need to do something different. I think people deserve better. The system needs to be better. So you talk about, for myself, when I'm, kind of thrive and I am comfortable in disruption and change, like, that makes sense in a housing system whose results right now suck, who people need us to be better. And this is the, reality of where we are, is because that's what the system creates. So we need to be disruptive. We need to change the system. because it's not good enough for the people who need us to be better.
And maybe could you take a minute to share with us a little bit about your professional journey, getting to the spot, getting to where you are now in, housing, what motivates you, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. I always say that I kind of come by this work honestly in the end. I started out working, I did a whole bunch of jobs when I was younger. I worked in public health. I was a janitor for a while. I drove a truck, like did a whole bunch of that kind of stuff and settled into executive work working at a community center. And, worked at the community center for 5 years. That was around community development and helping people, connect to and have the access to resources, trying to really mitigate the impacts of poverty on people. And then, the next step was healthcare. And then I moved over to housing, now with Habitat for Humanity and Build Now. So like it's been kind of a natural progression of just being involved in these grassroots. And to a certain extent, that just, like I said, I comes by naturally. My father was a minister. My mother was a social worker. And so this idea that we invest in and we care about community, we work for community, we work for those causes that kind of resonate with us was always there. My mother also is a governance expert. So I come by some of this executive and governance and board stuff that comes with the role just sort of naturally. The joke at home was always, kids would put up a sign that's like, on a tree house or something saying like nobody allowed and that kind of thing. Like my mom jokes that I would put up a sign saying like AGM in process because like that's just the stuff that I knew because that's what they did. Like they were just involved with like my, whether it be from the church or from my mom's work, with all the work that she did on like that's just what I grew up in. So I kind of say I come by to some of this work honestly. It was the waters I swam in as a kid. So you take that sort of deep connection to community, that idea that we are, that resonant value of like giving back, and tie that with, a childhood that maybe had a little more governance than your average childhood, and you kind of get what I am today.
Amazing. And I happen to hear from our team that one mentor has called you a mix of Bart Simpson and St. Francis of Assisi, mischievous, rebellious, but also deeply compassionate and committed to marginalized communities. Firstly, is that true? Secondly, how do those two sides of your personality show up in your leadership style?
It is true. Yeah. Wonderful mentor. Her name's Kathy Brothers. Just one of the best people. Was asked it was a newspaper feature on some of the work that we're doing here at Habitat, and asked about, the person asked about me, and that's how she described me. Because like, as an aside, I hate bios. I hate when people are like, hey, what is your bio? I was like, I don't want to talk about myself. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. And so, when I read that and other people are like, man, Kathy did a great job. I was like, yep, I'm going with it. I think Kathy kind of captured a bit of that essence. I think the two parts of that, that they make me who I am, but they drive each other. Success in not-for-profits is like changed people in better lives. So there's like this, I don't know, rebelliousness or this restlessness with the status quo, because I really do think we can do better. And that desire to do better comes from that sort of other side. So there's this sort of, like I said, mischievous or rebellious sort of side to push against the status quo, to do something different. But it is rooted in those, I even talked about earlier, that's those sort of values I grew up with, where like, people matter and we need to care deeply about people. And I was taught to care deeply about people. And so when I'm involved in any of the sort of work that I've done, like if this isn't working, it's not like, oh no, we didn't make as many widgets as we could. It's like, no, people needed us. They counted on us and we didn't do good enough for them. And so this sort of thing in me is to try and make sure that I can do the best that I can for the people that I have been asked to invest in, the community I've been asked to make better. Like that's what the role is. And so there's a restlessness in trying to make sure that I am maximizing all of that. Like if we fail as a sector, like, yeah, I said, it's not like we didn't make enough, widgets, or there's not enough product on the shelf. Like people really need what we do. And so I think I am restless and rebellious and push against all that because I want the people who we're supposed to be, supporting, we're supposed to be engaging with and kind of doing, this work for, to have what we promised them, which was in this place, better housing. We said we're going to make housing better. Like I have to do that. That's why I'm here. So I think those two things kind of drive each other.
Well, yeah, I agree. I think we can't settle for, it's not even less than the best. It's far below that, right? Housing affordability continues to be one of the most pressing issues in Canada. From your vantage point, what are the biggest challenges we need to address right now?
So, like, there's the stuff that everybody knows. I think if you're paying any attention to housing, like high interest rates make it hard if you're trying to buy a house. That stuff's expensive, and the high price of homes makes that tricky. High construction costs, like stuff has all gone up in price. There's tons of red tape. So there's all the obvious stuff, but like the other stuff we don't always talk about, I think, which is driving some of this crisis, is some of the ways that our systems and policies and structures are actually making things worse. Like a lot of the stuff that we talked about, this idea that the system is created to, the results we're getting are what the system has been created to create, produce. That stuff happens here where we talk about like policy drives doors, not necessarily better housing. You think about if you're funding from the government on per door basis, you're going to put up as many doors as you can. The question isn't, are these good houses? Are these meeting the needs of the people? They're just more doors. And so, profit sectors and trying to make more profit drive smaller spaces, which isn't necessarily better. Moralizing around like, what is earned or deserved makes it hard to build the housing. So like, part of why we have, the biggest challenges we're trying to get over are like, there is this system that is there and has been around us and the waters we swim in is not actually optimized for people. It's not optimized to actually make housing better. Like I was talking in a group the other day about all the stuff you have to do to get like a permit and to get a plan in place. And like the last thing on the list seems to be people. Talk about like, hey, we got to make sure like what's the parking going to look like, and are the roadways big enough for all of our cars, and what about the environmental realities? And we've got setbacks and shadows, and all this stuff matters. But it's just all of these other things, and after all of the other stuff, like as soon as we make sure there's enough spaces for cars and that we've got enough spaces for all the other sort of bits and pieces that have to make this property work, we then get to ask the question, okay, so like where can the people go? Like they're the last thing on the list by the time we get through all of the other bits. And I think that's indicative of this whole system. It's what did we design this house for? We designed it for investors so that they could buy this and create more, wealth for them and the people that they're working on behalf of. Or what was this designed for? What was to try and meet a government program, which was trying to create as many doors as possible, not a more livable community or necessarily not a more, healthy community. Like there's just something broken in what is driving the way in which we do this stuff. And so we keep getting these results that we're getting, which is like not a lot of great anything.
Bit of a disconnect, I guess, between, well, you see it too, between housing homelessness or the infrastructure, like you say. Are we planning around housing as infrastructure as well with people in mind? Can you share with us?
That's a great example.
Yeah.
I think that the homelessness stuff's a great example. We have taken the right approach and said, hey, we're going to absolutely, treat people with the respect they deserve and not pair that with any of the infrastructure to actually do that well. So like you've just now got the worst of both worlds. You're trying to be, you're not going to do the things we used to do, which is the right choice, but we haven't funded ourselves to do it the right way. And so you end up with these things where we've got this tension of, we've got, I don't know, encampments. It's a great example of this. You've got folks with nowhere to go. And we said, well, we're going to make sure that we don't, we have to treat them with respect, and we have to make sure that we are being, careful and caring. Okay, great. But like leaving them in that situation isn't necessarily the most, and that's not where people necessarily want to be, but we haven't created a structure or an infrastructure to help house people better. And so we're just kind of in the worst of both worlds. And the same story we talk about, like, what are we developing for? Like, who is the primary? We don't build family housing anymore because it's not good for investors. It's not good for on a square foot basis. It's not the type of thing that drives the market. And so we're, looking at where do families go? Well, they can't because we're building, 1 and 2 bedroom condos, if even that anymore. And housing is, so unbelievably expensive. Rents are up. Like all of that stuff just means that we just don't have people at the center of what we're trying to do here. And it's, one of the biggest issues we're facing, I think, as a housing industry is that we've kind of lost the plot on what we're trying to do and who it's for.
Can you share with us how habitat programs are making an impact on families and communities, and what sets habitat apart from other approaches to housing?
Well, you probably like heard a bit of it as I'm kind of talking here. Like our focus is really on like families and it's on ownership. So there's something different than your traditional housing provider. We want to make sure that there are opportunities for folks to own a home, not just rent, because we think the opportunity to gain generational wealth and like the equity that comes with ownership is transformative to a family. Like that's the type of stuff you think about. Like where does wealth usually start in a family or a family unit? The house is the biggest asset that a lot of people ever have, and it's the thing that appreciates in value. You get to, so as opposed to that old adage, like as opposed to putting your money towards rent, if you're putting it towards equity, you're paying down a mortgage. Like that is money you end up getting back in the end, so you can create wealth for a family. And so we're really particular on our kind of niche area is focusing on families and focusing on ownership. And that families part is the other thing. There's not a lot of other folks that are really able to kind of key in the way that we have, that we're not just housing. It's housing specifically for families because a lot of families have been left behind when it comes to housing planning and when it comes to affordable sort of work. Because, again, think about what the government incentivizes. The government incentivizes through funding, let's say doors. You get X number of dollars per door that you build. Okay, should I build 3 one-bedroom units or should I build, 1 3-bedroom house? Well, you're going to get more government funding if you build a bunch of 1-bedrooms. Okay, but what about the family that has, a mom and dad and 3 kids? Like, where are they supposed to go when the government system is incentivizing smaller and smaller units and more doors, but nothing for families? And I think that's a disconnect that we're trying our best as Habitat to continue to fill this void because it just isn't there from a lot of other providers.
So you haven't yet told us about Build Now. This Waterloo Region initiative is gaining attention. Can you walk us through what it's about and why it's such a critical project for the region?
Sure. So the Build Now is kind of getting at all those big, broad system things we've been talking. Our goal here is going to build 10,000 homes. We want there to be a mix of affordable ownership and attainable ownership and rentals. So we're looking to try and find that balance to say, we don't want to just create more rental. We realize rental is an important part of this, but we want to not lose sight of that ownership stuff. And so our hope here is to kind of split this 70-30, 70% ownership, 30% rental is kind of the target. And this is really for that sort of missing middle income earner folks who have just been priced out of the market. You think about folks who used to be able to buy homes, folks who housing didn't used to be a problem, who are in today's environment, in today's world, really struggling with this. Like I think about some of the folks that have applied into our Habitat program, the types of folks that we're targeting this Build Now program at. Like, a single mom who's a nurse making, a nurse's wage, which is not a bad wage, but is no longer enough to support, herself and her 2 kids and reasonably afford housing. Like there's something so broken that that's the person who needs our support, but they do, because there isn't an affordability option for an affordable option for that parent, for that mom. Like that's the type of stuff that we're looking at. Like where do you find, and specifically again back to family style housing, who's going to build the stuff that isn't getting built? We're looking to build stuff that like people can actually afford, that isn't going to be taken away from them because of I don't know, bad actors. It's perpetually affordable. And that's the other thing that I'm really excited about. This isn't a one-time injection. It's not just that we're going to try and create affordable housing this one time and the person sells it, it's back to market. We put stuff in place to make sure that there will be affordable and attainable ownership and rental housing as long as the community needs it. So this isn't just a one-time thing. This is there for generations if that's what they kind of need. And we're not just going to be building the same old. Not going to be building the same. We're really focusing on putting people at the center and saying, what do people need to build a healthy community? What types of things do we need? So you need to make sure that you think about the stuff like, how do we have, daycares and healthcare, a gym, the pub, all the stuff that kind of makes the community come to life. We're going to put a bunch of families, like they need this stuff. And so we're trying to say, how do we bring all that together? And so through partnerships with developers, through partnerships with our local municipalities, we think we can create something transformative in housing through this Build Now initiative that's going to build, massive impact, thousands of homes. And we're really excited that we're going to get those way below market cost. So we're not just saying, hey, we're going to build lots of housing. We're excited to get that to a point where people can actually afford it again. We're going to create houses. There's a bit of a simple idea in all of this, I suppose. The Build Now idea is that we're just going to make it so people can afford to buy a house again. They're going to make it so people can afford to pay rent again by creating that stock in the community that is affordable to buy, affordable to rent, so people can continue to do the things they've historically always been able to do when it comes to housing.
Okay. Wow. So I'm going to go back to a couple things there because this is like super interesting. I think, well, definitely to me and to our listeners. So 2 things. 1, you was right past the lofty goal of 10,000 units. So I want to hear, how did we come to that? Who's on board to like make this happen? I've talked to, other leaders in different habitat chapters who it's been a struggle to create any or many units, right? And so 10,000 is a lofty goal. So want to hear more about that. And two, can you also tell us about your vision of, creating that stock and making it affordable? Are we essentially saying that, based on the influx of supply, that it's going to become more affordable, or by reason of the amount of scale of units that you're building, you're going to be able to get some good deals in there? If you can,
Yeah.
like indulge us here.
No, of course. I love to, like, I can talk about this forever. Um, so the 10,000 number in some respects is, there's some thoughts around like, what does the community need? There's also a sense that like we needed to, when we started talking about a goal, set a goal that, was going to be transformative. If I went out and said, I'm going to build 100 homes, people would be like, good, you should. That's your job. You're Habitat for Humanity. You're the housing providers. They're like, well, you should be building 100 homes. So, yeah, you make a good point. So, like, what was going to grab the attention? What was going to capture the imagination of our community, of the partners we were going to need? Like, we needed something that we said could actually make a transformative impact, not, nibble around the edges or like a small, like, hey, that's neat. It's a cool project, I suppose. Like, we wanted something that people were going to stop and say, that's important. That makes a difference in a way that we want to get behind, so that we could create the type of large impact that we think that we needed. Like you talked about, like they're just, it's hard to make big impact. So to a certain extent, like there's something about a big idea. How do you get partners? How do you get people behind something? How do you get people engaged and invested? At a certain point, something big and exciting is a part of that. Saying, hey, I'm going to build 100 homes and come back like, hey, maybe I'll build another 100 homes. Yeah, but we've got a project up in Waterloo that we're working on where we're hoping to put 1,000 homes in. That's land partnered with the city of Waterloo. We've got partners across the board who are going to help us make that happen. We're going to do 1,000 homes. We're hoping to have our first permit on that site by the end of this year. So in the next couple of months, we'll have our first permit. We're hoping occupancy in 27 for families and people to move into those first buildings. So we're really excited about that kind of stuff. The way that we make it affordable, which is kind of the other side. Like, okay, it's great. Interesting, lofty, audacious goal. Sure, how do you actually make it happen? So what we did is we tried to kind of take out the things that make housing expensive. So we talked about all those other kind of things that everybody knows. So like there's costs and stuff. So we took out profit. So we partnered with developers who have said, hey, we'll take our profit margin out. They'll work for a fee, but they're not going to take, they're not going to take their general cut. And the provincial government has done a lot of work in reducing development charges for not-for-profit developers. And so as a not-for-profit developer, we want to pay development charges. And then we partnered with our local municipalities to say, hey, one of the biggest things that influences housing costs is land. Land is so expensive. And so if we can remove, developer profit, if we can remove development charges, if we can remove land costs, and just take that off the board, like what's left? Well, it's just kind of construction costs. Like what does it cost to actually build? So if we can just sell the house for what it costs us to build, removing profit and removing a whole bunch of cost drivers, we can get housing back down to a price that people can reasonably afford again. So we take out some of the inflationary realities. And then because this is a big idea, because this is interesting, we do also expect, we're not counting on it. It's not required, but we do think that we'll have some really cool partners who will come alongside of us and say, hey, this is something different. This is transformative. We want to be a part of this. We're happy to, donate to this or to reduce our costs or to take a little bit of a haircut on our own profits. It's not required. This all works if everybody down the line, expects full profit. But if there is a company that says, hey, we happily donate some of our profits back into this, that just means we can sell the home for a little bit cheaper, or, make a little bit better public realm. There's all those opportunities to kind of reduce those costs. The trick to the end of this sort of stuff, how does this all stay affordable? The idea is that I'm a simple guy, so I'm going to do some simple math. Let's say we sell a house for $400,000. Right now, the average house in the Waterloo region is kind of $750. The average sort of, comparable sort of space. So we're going to get, hopefully, let's say we get this down to $400,000, almost half price. You buy it for $400,000. The expectation is, and there's some, legal stuff that kind of makes this end up working and have to be there, is that you sell it relative to your purchase price, not relative, as the market grows. So it's not relative to the 750, it's relative to the 400. So you bought this house, you got a great opportunity to finally get into the market at 400,000. The market's gone up 10%. You get to participate in that. You just have to sell the house for 440, 10% growth. And you have to sell it to an eligible family. So somebody else, or an eligible participant. So somebody else who is just like you needed that chance to get into the housing market. You sell it to another person like that and off you go. And so you can live there as long as you want. And when you're ready to move on, if you choose to move on to something else, you move to a different community, move to a bigger house, move to a different sort of space. You've participated in the market dynamics like everybody else. You get to make that. And the next person gets the same benefit, because if the market's gone up 10%, that house at 440 is just as cheap relative to market as it was at relative to 750, because we're tying it to the market growth. And so you get to participate in that, but it always means it's, X% cheaper than it would have been to buy it normally. And so that just keeps going on and on and on, as long as the community needs this.
So is that going to be, I know this is a bit technical, but is that going to be controlled through Habitat?
Yeah. So there's legal agreements. Everybody loves, and I find that when I'm talking about this, what people really want to know is how legal contracts work to maintain these things. So it's there. Yeah, there's legal stuff that we can do to make sure so you're buying in. You're buying into a program. You're buying into an idea. So you're opting into this to say, hey, if you would like to buy a house from us for 400,000, we would love to sell it to you. There are program requirements. You need to be an eligible kind of participant. So we're not going to sell these. Will not be these will not be investor properties. They're owner occupied. So if you're buying this as if you want to buy this as a second house, or you want to downsize, this isn't for you yet. If you've never been able to buy a house, you haven't bought a house, you live in the region, this is for you. You're the nurse that couldn't afford the house. You're, a PSW and an office admin who are, a couple of kids that just got priced out of the market years ago. This is for you. You're a tradesperson. We want all these people that we want in our community. You're a waiter working at the local pub, all that stuff. You want to live here. We want you to be part of the community you're working in. So we're going to create housing you can afford at a price that you can afford, as long as you want it. And then, off you go. And since you've opted into the program, part of that comes with, you get to buy it for a reduced price. It means you sell it for a relatively similar reduced price. The thing kind of goes up in the same way the market does, to a person just like you who needs that chance. Seems pretty fair on our end.
Yeah. I've heard some conversations around the Canadian dream and rethinking or reframing that might have to take place. It's interesting to hear you speak about, the idea of ensuring people get a bit more space they need or want. What would you say is I'd love to hear your perspective there.
I think we have to find a middle ground, because what can't be the case is what's always been. I kind of said, the system sucks. It's getting us terrible results. So it might not be that, everybody can get the garage and backyard like you could 30 years ago on your first house, or that kind of thing. And so what we're going to be building, and what we're trying, there is relative density planned in this Build Now project. We're not talking about, single family dwellings in the same sort of way. We're talking about density, but density built for families. So a little bit of a product of that kind of, everybody talks about missing middle. What is that? We're going to go build that. The thing that the market doesn't build, the thing that the programs aren't driving towards. So we're going to build, density that is focused on making sure it's family. So we're going to make sure that there's really good public realm, because, we can't necessarily have everybody have a private backyard. Okay. Then we have to be really intentional that there's really good public realm, really good space to engage in this. And I think, I think that we as Canadians don't use public realm well. And some of that is because, the public realm that we've built hasn't been there. We were used to having a backyard and a deck and all those sorts of things. And so we don't kind of design our communities that way. We're also just not trained in how to use it particularly well. I think about when I go to I took my kids, I got 3 young boys, and we'll go to, a provincial park or somewhere. We'll go to the local place to go swimming. There's a beach, water, all that stuff. And we pull up with we got a couple of chairs and a backpack full of snacks, and think we're going to make it through the day. And then I see all these other folks who just seem to understand how to use public space so much better. They're barbecues and a whole family spread, and they're there for the day, and they've got all the things to support because they're used to being involved. I would think I'm going to host a barbecue in my backyard, and they're like, I'm going to do it on the beach. I was like, that's such a better idea. That is so much nicer. So how do we help people understand how to use public realm? Well, part of it is making sure there is good public realm to use. So if I'm going to say, No, you're not going to end up with, the deck and the backyard and the white picket fence, the way that sort of Canadian dream had been. But I'm going to make sure that there is an opportunity for you to have that ownership stuff, because that matters. That creates the generational wealth, and that you can get into that market. I have to pair that with great public space, great opportunity and outdoor space for you to connect. And the hope is that if you do that well, if we create good public realm, not only do you have somewhere to go with your kids, but like you can then become tightly knit as a community. If you're outside, I always thought that the guy who knew, when I used to live in a little town called New Hamburg, my neighbor knew everybody. And the reason he knew everybody is because he was outside all the time. He sat on, he was a smoker. He sat on his front porch. And so he just knew everybody, didn't coming and going. He knew everybody that walked by because he was out there all the time. And it stuck with me. Like, people being out and in their community, they mean they get to know everybody in the community. So if the community is out and about, because that's where their backyard, that's where the public spaces, that's where their usable non-interior spaces, they'll get to know their neighbors better. They'll be safer communities because you know each other. They'll be tighter knit. They'll be more engaged together. Like, that's the type of stuff that we think can happen if we build the right sort of buildings and the right sort of space together. So we can't do a subdivision. Don't want to. We're going to create a whole community that gives you the opportunity for families, gives you opportunity for affordable purchase prices, gives you opportunity for rent, all the things that kind of we can't afford now. And it's going to come with a different way to engage outside, and hopefully something that creates community in a way that you hear a lot of people saying, man, I wish I knew my neighbors. I wish we were more tight knit as a space. I wish this was, more community connection. We think we can help make that possible in the way we actually design the community.
I'm going to take you back to 3 words you said. The system sucks. And ask you to maybe share, because I know certainly at Blue Door, the reason we host these conversations is because we want to learn about the possibilities, the policy possibilities, the people, and all the ideas that we can possibly put together to continue to advance an agenda of safe and dignified housing for everyone. So when you say that, if you could change policy and change system, where, like, tell us, like, what would that look like? What would you change? Like, what solutions would you want to see push forward immediately? In a perfect world, I know that there's so much more to that, but
No, I apologize. I feel like I sound like a broken record here. I think, like, if we were to do this right, it would be about people. It would be about people over regulations. Like, I think we focus on regulations. We focus on, mitigation, like whether it be, and I don't know. And so I could be wrong on some of this, but like sometimes it feels like all we're trying to do is design to not get sued. Like, how do we make sure that insurance, well, if insurance doesn't like this, then we can't do it. You're like, okay, but like, is that the be all end all? We want our society based around whether insurance companies think this is a good idea? Like, I don't know. My kids play, the other day, my kids were bored, and, it was the summer, and we said, like, go do something outside. And they started building a treehouse by themselves, unsupervised. And maybe, like, as a parent, I should have stopped them, but it's such a good idea, and I was so happy. And so, like, they were out there, they built this treehouse. It works great. Would I climb into it? Absolutely not. Not the least of which the fact that I am 4 times their size, but like, that's not great building. But like, they just went and did this. And I think, like, that's important, that we as a society have kind of lost something, that we are just so risk averse. We are so worried about lawsuits and insurance and all those sorts of things. I think it drives all kinds of weird policy stuff. The same sort of way we think about, all of the safety features we're going to build into every sort of thing, and all of the boxes we have to tick to get to. Now we can try and talk about whether people can live in this building. What this, like, just at a certain point, we've lost the plot. People aren't the center of this stuff anymore. And so if we design for outcomes, we had a system whose goal it was to create amazing housing for people, not a system that was designed to, make sure that every sort of box was checked or every sort of risk was mitigated. Or, like, this is not to say, like, let's just have no building codes or no policy. No, that's not what I'm saying. But there are so many things along the way that make it so hard to get to that, because we're not prioritizing the outcome of amazing housing, amazing communities. And so I think if we were to fix this, if we were to redo it, you'd focus on the outcome. How do we get as many people, like, less focus on, like, we drive through these processes. This is the first step, and then the second step, and it's like, none of that gets us to the best housing. It actually sometimes gets us to the worst housing, the worst outcomes for people, because we're focused on the process over the outcome. And so if we redesigned everything, It would just be, how does we make sure that people and livability and that kind of stuff that we all say we want is at the center of this?
Focus on human-centered design. So I'm going to ask you, through your work on multiple boards, both locally and nationally, what would you say are the lessons that you've taken from those governance experiences that are helping you to drive housing solutions?
So there's a couple of things that come to mind when I think about it, especially like governance and boards and those sort of folks where I spend a lot of my time. Like you have to be thinking about, like, you can't be building for today, right? Like I think about even when I'm trying to figure out, okay, what do we want to do for habitat, our policy or what we're trying to build today. But if I start a project today, it'll be years before those houses are actually built. So am I solving the problems of today, or am I thinking forward enough to say, what will housing look like, as best as I can tell, in 3 years when this housing is actually available to people? Will I be meeting the right sort of need? And I think, when we talk about boards and we talk about, the stuff that I've done around, solutions, we have to be thinking about the future, solving the future's problems, because like wherever we are today, this stuff takes so long. And I think that's one of the problems with housing policy stuff, is that we're trying to solve, or we have a solution like, this is a great idea, I think this would work. Well, it took us so many years to get to it. And now that it's finally implemented, it'll be 4 more years before anybody actually sees the results of it. Okay, so an idea we came up with 8 years ago will exist in the ground 5 years from now. The housing's really different over that 13-year stretch. Like, it's not the same sort of world, and we can't work. And so I think we have to be really disciplined as leaders and as folks, that we drive towards the future solutions. I guess the other thing, and this may just be my own dispositional stuff. Like, I think we have to be really careful that we don't just settle. That like I refuse to accept, and I think people that work with me know this, and they just don't, like, if somebody tells me this is the way we've always done it, like I just like instantly want to stop doing that. I instantly want to, like, and maybe this is back to why Kathy said that I have like perhaps like a bit of a rebellious nature. Like my first instinct is like, I'm going to break that. Because like that, I don't love, like, if the reason is this is a great idea, this is an awesome thing, great. But when it's, well, this is the way we've always done it. Okay, well, is this an awesome idea? Is this a good thing? Like, I think, when you're talking about boards, when you're talking about leadership, when you're talking about people with some measure of control, be really comfortable saying, like, okay, are we doing this because it's the best way, or are we doing this just because we do this? And so, like, you need people who are comfortable, poking at all that stuff, asking those questions, that you're not so, you have to, hold things with an open hand and say, like, this has worked. We've done this for a long time and we think it's still good. So we'll keep doing it, versus, well, we've always done it, we have to. So I think you just have to have folks that are ready for those discussions, because if you don't, if you're not looking far enough out, if you're too committed to some sort of idea of history, the way that things have always been done, you just keep repeating what's always been done. And what's repeating what's always been done has gotten us to where we are today. Like, we need something different. So you have to, if you're going to be involved in boards and governance and leadership and all that stuff, you have to be ready to do something different, because what we have right now isn't serving our communities.
You're also a dad.
I am.
You and your wife are raising 3 boys on a farm, I think. That's right. How is that? Like, tell us about that. And also, do you think that experience influences at all your perspective as a leader in the housing space? If so, like how? Sure. Yeah. So I live on a livestock farm. My wife's a farmer. We kind of joke sometimes that, like, I have office hands. That's like what people will say. That, like, she's got these like great calluses from all the work that she does, because she works the whole day. I do a lot of the farm work. I do work like a lot of evenings and weekends. It's farming stuff. But to care for my delicate office hands, I always wear gloves. I think the things that I kind of take from that sort of work and that sort of stuff, like, it's important, it's helpful for us, like for me personally as a leader in this space, because the results are instantaneous. Like, if we go put up a fence, I can see that I put up a fence. If we go and, cut a field or we move cattle, like, I can see the fruits of my labor in a way that, like, housing policy, like I said, we're working on a project for 3 or 4 years and it's still not done. Like, that stuff can feel tiring. So I think the farming work helps make me a bit more patient, helps me understand, like, I get to kind of scratch that itch of, like, man, something has to get done. Like, we have to see something, the results of something. Farming helps with that. I think with my boys, it's really important, like, they get an understanding of, like, what hard work is. I don't know if this might make sound like I'm 1,000 years old, but, like, I like the idea that they get to understand, like, hey, hard work is important, who we are as a family, like, we work
at the stuff, and that working hard does create something. Like, not everything's within our control, but like hard work on a farm tends to, create results. It's just kind of what you have to do. And that idea of, that there are just things you have to do. Like if a problem pops up, like, hey guys, we got to go do this. And so I think when it comes to, housing, when it comes to work, when it comes to the stuff that I do professionally here, to a certain extent, sometimes it might sound weird, like nothing ever feels quite as urgent. So I don't get overwhelmed the same sort of way. Like, it's bad if a project isn't going well, or, we have a permit that gets delayed, or fundraiser didn't go the way we thought. But like, it's not the same as a call when somebody says, hey, your cows are on the road. And I was like, I need to deal with that immediately. Like that sort of, like, there are some immediacies to farming that I think makes it feel like it wasn't as bad as that. Like, back to like healthcare, when we were dealing in healthcare, like, people were, they were doing healthcare as a way that I was through COVID. Like, you were worried about like people, whether they're going to be okay. So sometimes it makes it a little simpler to kind of come to work and be like, all right, this is the simple side. The farming stuff is, a far more, like, it is far more, like, if I don't move those cows today, if I don't move them immediately, something bad's going to happen. It makes it a little easier to kind of put things in perspective, being like, yeah, this is important and we'll get at it and I can work at this and hard work will pay off. And I don't feel the pressure of like, what happens if it doesn't get done this minute? Because I think I can help keep things in perspective from the farming side.
Very interesting. Thank you, Phil, for joining us today and sharing your insights. Definitely feel a mix of your vision, compassion, boldness in the way that you approach housing and community development. We so appreciate the work that you're doing through Habitat and this very brave and bold initiative, Build Now, Waterloo Region. And we're looking forward to following and seeing how your leadership continues to shape solutions to Canada's housing challenges. Thank you so much again for being part of On the Way Home.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
So that's it for today's episode of On the Way Home. That was Phil sharing his wisdom, energy, and boldness with us. Phil, your leadership shows what's possible when we bring both heart and disruption to the housing conversation and to our listeners. Thank you for tuning in. On the Way Home is a podcast brought to you by Blue Door. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe, share the episode, and check out more stories of people working every day to build a future where everyone has a place to call home.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.